Hello, fourth graders. I am filming this lesson from my dining area of my apartment in San Francisco. So excited to start our first digital YouTube lesson of the school year. So today I'll be filming a lesson about the history of voting rights, okay? This is actually going to be a two-part lesson. So the first part I'm posting today, and there's an assignment question at the end for you to complete, and then the second part will come tomorrow. As you're following along with this video, it will be helpful if you have today's assignment in front of you. It's called Voting in America, a Timeline. Ideally, if you could watch the video perhaps on a phone and then follow along on your iPad or computer. Similarly, these pages are in the packets that were passed out on Monday, and they'll be passed out again on Thursday if that's helpful. If that's not possible and you're watching this on your computer or your tablet, you can just look at these pages after the lesson, but I will be reading some of these pages, so it's helpful for you to follow along. So first let's discuss our learning target, right? A learning target is what you should be able to do or know by the end of a lesson. By the end of this lesson on the history of voting rights, you should be able to explain how the right to vote has changed throughout American history. So that's the goal for this lesson. So let's start off this lesson, okay? So to start off, we are gonna need to use our imaginations, okay? And it might help if you close your eyes to really get your imagination working. Imagine that you're back in the classroom, sitting in your carpet spot, and I tell the class that we're gonna get to vote on a class mascot. A mascot is like an animal, person, or sometimes a thing that is considered to bring good luck. Most sports teams have mascots. In fact, Garfield has a mascot, and that's the Wildcat. We want to come up with a mascot for our class, room 254. Our mascot and its image will be on everything we do and make. Okay? In other words, it will define who we are as a class. Take a second to think about what kind of mascot you might want to have and what kind of mascot you might want to vote for when we do our class vote. Take a second. Okay. This decision will affect everyone in the class, but not everyone will be able to vote. In fact, only the boys will vote. The girls do not have the right to vote in this election. Think to yourself, how does this voting process make you feel? You might be thinking, it's not fair for everyone not to be able to vote on something that will affect them. Or maybe you're thinking, the girls are part of this class too. Why can't they vote on something that they'll have to live with? Today, we're going to look at how the right to vote has changed throughout America's history. Remember, today's learning target is, I can explain how the right to vote has changed throughout American history. Let's start by thinking about the word right. What does the word right mean? Some of you might be thinking about the word right in terms of right or wrong, like, I got that answer right on my test, right? Today, and for the purpose of these lessons, we're going to be thinking about the word right with the definition of the freedom to do something, okay? So in order to learn more about how voting rights have changed throughout American history, we're actually going to read a timeline, which is another type of informational text. Timeline is a compound word, right? It includes the word time and line. Based on this, what do you think this type of text is going to look like? A timeline. Some of you may be thinking the words are going to be written all in one line, right? Or there will be times or dates on the line. You're not wrong. A timeline is a list of events arranged in the order in which they happened, okay? This type of informational text is different than some of the others that we've read this year. This year we've mostly read articles as informational text, and a timeline is still an informational text, but it's not in the same format as an article. So let's look at our timeline. Take out your assignment, Voting in America, a Timeline, if you can, either on another device or piece of technology, or in the packet if you picked it up on Monday. I'm going to read the first 2 pages, the timeline on this document. If you have it in front of you, make sure to follow along as I read. Voting in America, a timeline. 18th century. Most of the colonies have some form of elected government. Only property owners can vote. In some colonies, voting is restricted based on race, sex, and religion, but the most important qualification is wealth. 1776. The Declaration of Independence, written by slave owner Thomas Jefferson, states that all men are created equal. 1777. Women lose the right to vote in New York. 1780. Women lose the right to vote in Massachusetts. 1784. Women lose the right to vote in New Hampshire. 1787. The U.S. Constitution is ratified. It gives each state the right to determine the qualifications for voting. Most states restrict voting to male property holders over the age of 21. Some states bar free African Americans from voting. 1801. Residents of Washington, D.C. lose the right to vote. 1807. Women lose the right to vote in New Jersey, the last state to allow women the right to vote. 1848. The Women's Right Convention takes place in Seneca Falls, New York. 1856. North Carolina gets rid of the wealth requirement for voting, the last state to do so. 1867. The 14th Amendment makes African Americans citizens but defines voters as male. 1870. The 15th Amendment gives African American males the right to vote. 1878. Congress rejects the Susan B. Anthony Amendment. 1880s. A series of laws known as the Chinese Exclusion Act deny Chinese Americans citizenship. 1887. The Dawes General Allotment Act states that Native Americans can vote only if they resign from their tribes. 1898. U.S. Supreme Court rules that U.S.-born citizens of immigrants are citizens. U.S.-born children of immigrants are citizens. 1920. The 19th Amendment gives women the right to vote. 1924. The Citizenship Act makes Native Americans citizens with the right to vote. 1943. The Chinese Exclusion Act is repealed. Chinese Americans gain the right to vote. 1946. Filipinos gain the right to become U.S. citizens and to vote. 1952. The McCarran-Walter Act gives first-generation Japanese Americans the right to become U.S. citizens and to vote. 1961. The 23rd Amendment gives residents of Washington, D.C. the right to vote in presidential elections only. 1964. The 24th Amendment eliminates poll taxes, which had been used to restrict voting in the South. 1965. The Voting Rights Act eliminates so-called literacy tests, which had been used to keep African Americans from voting in some southern states, and gives the federal government power to oversee voter registration and fair elections in some areas. 1971. The 26th Amendment lowers the voting age from 21 to 18 nationwide. 1973. The Home Rule Act gives residents of Washington, D.C. the right to elect a mayor and city council. 1974. The U.S. Supreme Court rules that states may deny felons the right to vote. 1978. Congress passes the D.C. Voting Rights Amendment, which would have given Washington, D.C. residents representation in Congress. Only 16 states ratified it. Woo! That was a lot of information. Since you have the timeline accessible on your devices through Google Classroom, feel free to go back and reread it a second time or get clear on any parts that you might have been confused on. And we'll do a lot more of that tomorrow as well in terms of unpacking some of the vocabulary. So let's think to ourselves, what is the main idea of the information contained on this timeline? In other words, what seems to be one big idea that you can take away from the information on this timeline about the right to vote in America? What does this make you realize about the history of voting rights in America? Write your answer in the box on the 3rd page of the document, where it says, complete this on Tuesday, April 7th. It says, after reading the timeline or hearing Miss Land here read it on her YouTube lesson, what is the main idea of the information contained on this timeline? For example, what seems to be one big idea you could take away? Okay, think about this. We just read all these different things. What is it that you think this timeline shows or tells about the history of voting rights in our country? Now, when you've completed your answer and you've typed it in, you do not need to press turn in or submit on the top of the document, as we'll be completing the rest of the pages with tomorrow's lesson. Still make sure that you're writing in your answer today though, because we did just read this all together. We'll pick up right here for tomorrow's video lesson. We're going to learn a lot more about some of the vocabulary in this timeline. All right, be sure to text me if you have any questions, and get started on the question right here on page 3.